Welcome to Green and Red, scrappy politics for scrappy people. A regular podcast on radical environmental and anti-capitalist politics. Brought to you by Bob Bazanko and Scott Parkin.
Welcome to the silky smooth sounds of the Green and Red podcast. I'm your co-host, Scott Parkin, back in Berkeley, California. And as always, I am joined by
Bob Bazanko at the end of the earth.
at the end of the earth. And then we're also joined by our friend, Jason Myles, who is the host of This is Revolution podcast, also a musician and writer. Jason, welcome back to the Green and Red podcast.
Thank you guys so much for having me. And before we even get started, I want to say that it truly is an honor to be on the show. I respect the work you guys do, not just in this media space, but the work you actually do in the real world. So thank you.
Thank you.
What is the real world anymore is my question.
Nothing we're going to talk about today.
No, we're going to definitely talk about fantasy world.
Yeah.
So Jason is also the producer of a documentary called Kayfabe, which is about pro wrestling and politics. Jason is very knowledgeable on lots of stuff, but has made a documentary which streams on Means TV. Is that correct?
Yeah. It's TV, yeah.
And about pro wrestling. And we actually did a show a few months ago with Jason about it. But today we thought it'd be a good follow-up with the passing of Hulk Hogan last week to talk with Jason again. And we're going to talk about, what's this called? Muscle, swagger, and politics.
That's a good.
Hogan obviously was in the media a lot with his passing, but he was also in the media a lot last year when he introduced Donald Trump for his acceptance speech at the Republican National Convention. We're going to talk a little bit about the background of Hulk Hogan. We're going to talk about the importance of Hulk Hogan as a cultural icon, and then maybe get into a little bit of the personal life and personal politics of Hulk Hogan is what we're going to do. I will say that, just to kick it off, as a kid, I was really into pro wrestling. We talked about this when we interviewed Jason back in May or whenever that was. And so Hulk Hogan was like larger than life for a young kid. But Jason, maybe we could just kick off a little bit with, tell us a little bit of your thoughts on Hulk Hogan, more in this sort of cultural the place he falls into this culture, maybe this cultural political moment, because it seems like he surged last year when he spoke at when he introduced Trump at the RNC, like where I hadn't seen him really in a while.
I think there's an argument to be made that the success of Hulk Hogan as heel really helps bring in Donald Trump as political figure that can be respected. Hulk Hogan, his real name is Terry Bollea. Terry Bollea, the man, is quite different from Hulk Hogan, the character. It's definitely, he started out as a heel in wrestling, and it didn't really stick.
Heel being like villain.
Heel being villain, sorry.
Yeah.
There's baby faces and heels. These are some terminology. A few words we're going to throw around. Is definitely heel as a villain, baby face as a good guy, and heat as in fan attention. And heat is this very important word. And when Vince McMahon decides to truly monopolize the viewing power of professional wrestling, it's almost as if he's got a crystal ball and he really understands how cable television is going to reshape media. And kind of why I put the Kayfabe docuseries together with another filmmaker, a young man named Alex Michel out of Southern California. But what happens is, and a lot of people don't really understand this, and Bob, and I'm not saying this to be mean, is a little older, so he came up in an era where pro wrestling was on your local station. And it was still in arenas. It was still a big deal, but it was very regional. It was very local.
They were on UHF channels, if you know what those are.
Yes. I remember because I'm towards the end of that. Wrestling was also really violent. It was very bloody. It always spilled out into the stands. If you go look at wrestlers from the generations before WWF and the Hogans, those guys' faces and foreheads are scarred to be damned, to the point where you can put a quarter in some of those knife wounds and slashes, because it was all about bleeding and blood. Now, even though young people came out to these matches, this isn't going to be PG-13 entertainment. Vince McMahon wants to monopolize, so he's got to have something that's going to be good for children as well, because children become this huge market like we haven't seen before because of certain deregulations in marketing. My fondest memories of childhood are 22-minute commercials called cartoons. So Vince McMahon now can market wrestling and not just have t-shirts and apparel, but actually have action figures for little kids. So Hulk Hogan plays into this perfect. He's a large figure. He's actually on the first wave of guys that are going to take steroids. Before, wrestlers were kind of, right? Or not that big. And Hulk Hogan and Rocky Johnson, The Rock's dad, Ron Simmons, these are the guys that are going to be first wave of real steroid freaks that are just ripped and imposing figures. So for me, Tony Atlas, believe he was actually Mr. Universe, an actual Mr. Universe.
And he was tag team buddies with Rocky Johnson.
So you know what I'm talking about, Scott. There's these big buff wrestlers, and Hogan is part of that new generation that's coming in with Macho Man. And he really shows you why he's going to be the champion in that first WrestleMania when he body slams Andre the Giant, who is 7'5", but not a very muscular man, but massive man. But that's putting to rest the old era of wrestling, and the new era's approaching. And that's going to be the red and yellow McDonald's colors, right? Because those are the most popular colors in advertising, of Hulkamania, which is very fan inclusive, right? When he's about to lose to an opponent, he kicks out of a move and it's the fans cheering, and he puts his hand to his ear, and the energy from the fans comes through his body, and he defeats the guy in front of him, and all the Hulkamania in the ring or outside of the ring and at home, all the spectators helped him win. And he's kind of family-friendly guy. And by the end of the 80s, that shtick is starting to wear thin, especially at the end of the Cold War, because WWF at the time is just Cold War iconography. So Hogan eventually leaves to a rival promotion that Ted Turner put together, because Ted Turner is just a wrestling fan. So it was hemorrhaging money for years, and he didn't care. And Hogan goes with the same shtick. They're not selling out the rooms. They're at Disney World. No one's showing up. They're literally giving tickets away. And the guy in charge decides to make a monumental pivot and put Hulk Hogan as a bad guy. And around that same time, there's also some cultural moments happening that we have to keep in mind. For the sports fans out there, the Chicago White Sox for years had what some people call some of the most atrocious jerseys in the 80s. But at the end of the 80s into the 90s, they went with a color scheme that they still go with today, which is the Black Sox throwback. That had a lot to do with the success of the then LA Raiders and their proximity to hip hop. So if you look at literally where everybody was, the good guy now is dressed in black. Johnny Cash is having a resurgence. And this is where we are with anti-heroes and Hulk Hogan turning heel, and the group of wrestlers he's a part of, which is a pretty offensive group of wrestlers that includes another man who passed away a few years ago, and Scott Hall, who was Razor Ramon and did a very offensive Spanish accent. And they pretty much dressed him up in, I don't know what you call it, brown face. I don't know what to call it. But no one seemed to have a problem with it. And of all the things that I've heard people say in these eulogies of Hogan, The first thing is he stopped the union or a unionizing effort by Jesse the Body Ventura, which is true. Jesse Ventura hated Hogan, but he also kept working for the WWF as a ringside announcer. And even after that happened, no one ever tried to unionize again, at least none that I know of. So it's not Hogan stamped on everybody's testicles and they were never allowed to do it again. The effort probably wasn't as big as Ventura would like it to be, but still Hogan did snitch because there was a big case about steroid abuse with Vince McMahon and the wrestlers. And then also Hulk Hogan said some ridiculously disparaging things in a private conversation that seems like reality show BS, right? He's screwing his buddy's wife that's a radio host and saying just horrible things about black people. He doesn't want his daughter to be with a black person and blah, 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 blah. They're private things, first and foremost. And me personally, I just didn't care about Hulk Hogan. He actually was kicked out of the WWE Hall of Fame for 2 years after that happened. He did eventually get reinstated. I think Terry Bollea is probably a complicated figure because if you follow wrestling, every time he's been interviewed, he lies a lot. He lies a lot. He overstates his importance. He lies and says he was in rooms that he wasn't in. So he's a guy that kind of says what he needs to say that he thinks the person next to him wants to hear. So he's a person I don't really take at face value so much. He was a part of my childhood for a very short time, and then I grew out of it. And the antics he did with the NWO would be, to me, mirrored more just where society was. I don't think it influenced society. I think it mirrored society. I mean, they said, Scott Hall is on record of saying their NWO for life slogan was taken from a Mac 10 rap song that was popular at the time. So everything about them was stolen from the name New World Order. The all in black image was something that was really popular because at this point, hip hop is no longer fringe. It becomes popular culture. And they just raced that to a level that they made this fledgling league of wrestling extremely popular and changed it for a good portion of the 90s. And they usher in what we're going to call the Attitude Era.
You mentioned the Cold War because I am a generation before you. So I remember the villains were like Ivan Koloff, the Sheik. And there were these were like these epic battles between good and evil, right? Politically. How does somebody like Hulk Hogan, who's a blonde-haired white guy, a big one, how do they make that shift from these like villains who are like Bobo Brazil or, there were these kind of exotic figures, people like that. And then the good guys were like, growing up, my favorites were like Bruno Sammartino and Dominic DeNucci. And there was another guy, Martino, the Italians, right? I would go to Youngstown and see that when they bashed the Sheik over the head with a ladder and you'd all cheer or something like that. How do you make that transition from these Cold War kind of morality plays to kind of somebody like Hulk Hogan becoming the heel?
We can go deeper into pop culture and think about cartoons like G.I. Joe, which is just the most jingoistic raw America cartoon you can have for little kids to watch. I was part of those little kids. The Soviet Union falls. Who does G.I. Joe fight? Right? He fights domestic terrorism and corporate pollutants. So that becomes the pivot. The enemy is ourselves in the 90s from a cultural standpoint, right? Because we don't really have the great big bad of the Soviet Union anymore. And Americans, for the most part, disengage politically because I don't know too many people of my age group. Scott, you're just a couple years older than me, that actually give a shit about what happened in the Balkans in the mid 90s or even know that there was a genocide over there. Because we're so used with these stories of, how do you say it? The duality of man, right? Hulk Hogan is a good guy, but he's doing bad things for a good reason. He's all for self. I do think deregulation helps with that too, because we're seeing financial deregulation start around 94. Credit's easier to achieve. By the end of the 90s, we'll get into the zero down home purchases. with the total dismantling of Glass-Steagall. So that really helps the neoliberal idea of you are an army of one. So for a lot of people, the NWO Hogan might mirror more them. If you go back and watch some of that footage from the NWO years, some of the things he says and does, because at the same time, Donald Trump is dipping his toe in with the WWF, who's stealing everything they can from WCW until eventually they're able to buy him out. But I think we need bad guys, right, Bob? And with the fall of the Soviet Union, when I went to school, we had earthquake drills in California, but the rest of the country, apparently, they were bomb drills where we had to get under our desks. And we watched the news all the time about Star Wars and how we were going to shoot down these Russian missiles that were going to come attack us. And we were watching this since I can remember watching television. And once that's over, then the bad guy is us. And again, I think wrestling kind of mirrors that. You also get like the rise of gang culture, and it's violent time in the 80s and 90s. And they really do a good job of mirroring that with NWO to the point where they are a gang. And we liked cheering on that gang, but we love cheering on gangs in this country. The Godfather, Goodfellas, Sopranos. And if you think about that part of the 90s, now we're getting like the Godfather, the series, in the Sopranos. So we get to watch the bad guy on a weekly basis and cheer on his nefarious acts. And seeing this man that has been a paragon of virtue for probably about 10 years or so finally be the heel, I think people ate that up and loved it. Especially they loved his gang. And it became less about him and, well, who's going to be the new member of the gang this week?
Yeah, it's interesting because there is an element within pop culture, the villain are like corrupt corporate types, right? And it's like post Ivan Boesky, Gordon Gekko, and this pro wrestling being a reflection of what's going on in the society. And then we also see Trump, who's Trump or Trump-like characters in other film and television are definitely depicted as, if not the villain, then at least a side character, which like does not have good intent. And it's interesting that Trump begins to dip his toe into this venue, I guess you could say. And it also very much plays into this character of Trump, that he's a tough guy. And he's like this New Yorker who's like goes up against the city government, or he's like screwed over the mafia, or he dealt with the Russian mafia, or what have you. And so it is an interesting how it's a reflection of what's going on. And then we see that in the greater pop culture. But would you actually say with Hulk Hogan, there's this period where he becomes like the heel, but he also, there's that sort of classic moment. I think it was like in maybe 84. I watched a documentary about the Iron Sheik the other night. Iron Sheik had become world champion. Even though he was like the bodyguard for the Shah of Iran, he's representative of, the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is like everyone in America hates. And he's like this villain that they all hate and things like that. And then Hogan comes in and dispatches it quickly. And in many ways, a lot of the bits I've seen of Hogan, it's either been these really critical ones where he's racist and a scab and things like that, like from people like Dave Zirin. But then there's also like he transformed pro wrestling with his character, with his bigger than life sort of character. And he was in like a Rocky movie and all of that sort of stuff. What are your thoughts on that? Where there was a pro wrestling historian named Brian Soloman, who said that pro wrestling is divided into two parts: before Hulk Hogan and after Hulk Hogan.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
And then I'll say this, then there's the third part, which is after the heel pivot. And that's very important.
Right.
Before Hulk Hogan, wrestling is very violent. And let's pull back a little bit more. Before monopolization and after monopolization. It's a dirty world. Wrestlers literally died. They've been murdered in the dressing room over money. So it's a dark world. with some nefarious characters in it. And Vince McMahon, Emperor Palpatine in the Star Wars movies, brings order to the galaxy by rounding up the criminals, if you will. And Hulk Hogan is going to be the head of that. That only lasts for a short amount of time. The toys don't sell anymore because there's other things for kids to do, right? There's video games. The internet comes to be a thing. So how do you capture the attention of these 8 to 13-year-olds? And you don't. You capture the attention of 13 to 25-year-olds. And that becomes an interesting pivot for a guy as old as Hogan was to do. And those guys to do. I do agree there's the world before him, which is a real kind of bloody world of wrestling. Then there's the cartoonish world of jingoistic, raw America stuff. That doesn't last that long. It really doesn't. It'd be like 8 years, maybe less. Because he's really fallen out of favor, and they're trying to push new people towards the end of his time at WWE, and they just don't go over as well. And then there's the Hollywood Hogan pivot, where it's just great soap opera storylines. It's really violent again. We're going to bring the TNA into focus. We're going to have women that aren't tough. Another thing about the era of Hulk Hogan, women wrestlers were controlled by a woman named Moolah, who has a very complicated legacy. Some people say she didn't pimp women. There's women that said they were pimped by her. They said, oh, yes, she did. I'm of the mind that sure, she did a little bit of that because it's a different world. And you're going to make money how you make money before the great big merger. And
I saw her actually wrestle. Well, the Fabulous Moolah, right?
Yeah, Fabulous Moolah. And there was
saw her in Youngstown, Ohio.
And May Ross, is that her name? Yeah. Those women are hard. They were hardcore.
Yeah.
They were crazy. And they were a little criminal. That pivot, women can wrestle again. We see so many more women wrestlers that don't necessarily have to be just TNA people like you got in the 90s. In the 80s, you're just a ringside woman like Elizabeth. Remember Elizabeth? No, it's always crying over Macho Man. His real life wife, and they have a kind of sad history of abuse, and sadly she died to a drug overdose. But the point is, the sport really changes, and it hasn't changed back. We're never going back to the cartoonish wrestling that we saw in the 80s, because it just got more hardcore in the late 90s and the early 2000s with ECW. The extreme stuff where guys were breaking LED lights over each other and jumping off the ceiling of the arena onto a table full of nails. Like these guys, these quote unquote death matches, they call them, where we're just going to bleed. You're just going to bleed, and it's going to be a bloody mess. It's not going back to the raw America stuff because nobody cares. We want to see the violence.
So by that time, it's Hulk an afterthought?
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
So what?
He started
what accounts for his renaissance?
You say, how long is it?
No, what accounts for his resurgence?
If you were a figure, this is how I look at the world. I don't know if you guys look at it the same way. If you were a popular figure before internet, before streaming, you'll probably always have a career because you have a mass appeal, right? My 6-year-old knows who Michael Jackson is. Michael Jackson's been dead, Jesus, what, like 15 years now, something like that?
Or not, I think, yeah.
Yeah, but he knows who Michael Jackson is. All of my kids know who Michael Jackson is. I think most people know who Michael Jackson is.
Sure.
Because he was such a massive star. There's a lot of people that are popular on the internet. I don't know who they are. If you look up the most popular streamer, or not streamer, but what singer has the most streams right now of new artists, there's a good chance you've never heard that song before in your life. And there were so many songs, even songs that we hated, that you had heard before because of TV or terrestrial radio. So Hulk Hogan is part of an era where He was everywhere, if not for you, for your family. And then by the time you came into being, he was still on television. He had a reality show for a couple years called The Hogan Family, which is funny again because his name is Balea. It wasn't called the Baleas, it was called the Hogans. His daughter is known as Brooke Hogan. That's her name. So that's where kayfabe to me and Hulk Hogan is really interesting because every obituary I read, and I did see Zero and stuff, and I'm not the biggest fan, is always calling him Hulk Hogan and not calling him Terry Bollea. And this is, I don't know if you guys feel the same way. This to me is where guys like Donald Trump take advantage of a certain liberal moralizing of a life. We all agree that Hogan is a scab. He seems to be pretty racist and probably not a dude we'd hang with. That's fair. Did he bring joy to my life when I was 6 to 8? Yes. And he's Santa Claus, right? That's Terry Bollea, not cool. Hulk Hogan, there was a time where we were all about it. My cousin lived with me. He's a year younger, almost to the day. He was a huge Hogan fan. Rip his shirt off, huge fan when he would see Hogan. Does he feel the same way about Terry Bollea? No. But he still has good memories. And I think it's not good practice to attempt to shit on everybody's good memories. I think you can be nuanced. You can be measured in your critique of the man, definitely your conversation of the era, and not alienate people because every time someone comes on, oh, he was a horrible racist. It's almost, again, another Star Wars before. It's like Palpatine. Yes, give me all of your hate. Because they're going to say, see, these people, this is that liberal craziness we talk about all the time. Look, they don't want you to have any of your fun. Everybody's racist. Everybody white is a racist. That's what they tell you. This is a left-wing plot to end your fun. It's like, we can call Hulk Hogan or Terry Bollea a racist and say, 1984 Hulk Hogan was peak American exceptionalism. Think of that exports that we culturally had in that moment globally. It's gone now. And it's almost like everybody wants to shit on their past as if it didn't happen. And I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, this is actually something that Bob and I have been talking about a lot lately, is that, and this was actually more in regards to like the Texas floods and, all this like fuck around, find out you voted for Trump. And so then they like took away your FEMA taking care of you or what have you. And I think you're right. I think there is a nuance in, this is a little bit of a different thing because this is like people having some cultural memory around something that brought them joy as a child, or as a teenager, or maybe an adult. But I mean, I think there is something this sort of like liberal scolding, or this liberal, like there's a lack of compassion is how I see it. And then also there's a lack of compassion for in a place where we should be, in the very least as an organizer, I think we should be being smarter about how to find some common ground with people who don't necessarily agree with us or completely disagree with us in many ways, but we still have some common space because of the way the world is headed right now. And you're right, Trump is Palpatine, Musk is Palpatine, like these liberal woke mind virus kind of stuff going on. And it's like, of course they're going to scold you when your children get drowned, or of course they're going to make you feel bad for having good memories of Hulk Hogan when you were a kid watching TV. And I think there's like really something to that a lot of people in left liberal spaces are really missing. And granted, I know people are very upset by all the different things that Trump's doing, and I am too, going out and taking action in the street around that. But like, we need to figure out, like, we're seeing people on the right actually agree with us a lot on a number of issues just here recently. Gaza, bombing Iran, ICE raids, like the Epstein. Yeah, Epstein. Yeah. How could I forget about Jeffrey? But I mean,
pedophilia is not a selling point anymore.
But you know what I'm saying? Is that like there's this liberal sort of like scolding thing going on, which I think is no longer, which has never been productive and is really unproductive.
I hate it because, look, to me, this is how easy it is. You dig wrestling. you dig Hogan, you want to wax poetic about it. Maybe you're talking to somebody and you're like, this is why him killing the Union is bad. You like Jake the Snake? And they're like, oh, I just love Jake the Snake and the DDT. You're like, and you're like, after his time was up in the WWF, he was wrestling in like hotel ballrooms and high school gymnasiums and was horribly addicted to crack cocaine and was so destroyed by the industry that he could barely move. And if it wasn't for the grace of Diamond Dallas Page and his project of redemption for some of his friends in the industry, like Jake the Snake and Scott Hall, Jake Roberts would be dead. I don't want to live in a world where I need the grace of a human to get me out of a hole. We should be able to organize our labor and have things like pensions, healthcare that prevent us from having to continue to labor past the point when we're able to. That's a different conversation. You're talking about wrestling with somebody. You can stay in the wrestling conversation. And you're not shitting on something that they dig.
I was never followed wrestling that much or Hulk Hogan, but I always think that sports is actually a fairly good way to reach people, to talk to people. And I'm sure you've been in the same circles we have where people will deride you for that. They'll like, oh, today's the Super Bowl. Who cares? Or, oh, I bet you're all, or
Yeah.
yay, sport, and all that kind of shit. Like I've met people who you seemingly have nothing in common with, and you start talking about that. And then all of a sudden you have some air, meet people where they're at, kind of thing.
I love sports. Sports is the ultimate bonding tool. Kickball. Go play. You're not good at sports. Go have fun and play kickball. Go bowling. Go coach Little League in your neighborhood, and you will be able to be an organizing voice. I lived with a family. I don't know if I ever told you guys this. For years, I lived with a family that is not my own. They are white, Christian, quote unquote, conservatives. And one thing I learned from them was they were integrated in every aspect of life. A certain messaging is integrated in every aspect of life, from their kids' soccer coaches and little league coaches to the schools their kids go to. That messaging was integrated in every aspect of life. I don't see that in left spaces because there's a holier than thou thing. I'm too good to coach little league. I don't like sports. Wrestling is stupid. Bowling is stupid. It's like, man, everything that normal people do isn't cool to you. And a lot of this has to do with the fact, and you guys know this, that, we don't have a lot of unions, and unions were kind of a space for a lot of this education and bonding. But in absence of that, it's probably a bigger struggle to get like 6 people together to have a bowling team. To even unionize a factory nowadays.
I do think I haven't watched the NFL in probably 25 years. I think it's a horrible force for American society, but I keep going back. I was a professor for 30 years at the University of Houston, surrounded by self-described radicals and socialists and lefties and Marxists and all this kind of shit. The thing I enjoyed the most, my best memory by far, is for 25 years or so, 3 to 5 times a week, I played basketball. Rec League. We call it the NBA, the Noontime Basketball Association. It was by far the most integrated part of campus. These radical professors didn't have any friends who didn't look like them. But every day I'm there with faculty, with staff, with alums. We had basketball players come in. We had coaching staff come in, guys off the street. And I played with guys who were like pretty much rednecks from Mississippi. And I played with black guys from Chicago. And it was the best vibe, the best environment I ever encountered there on the basketball court, because we were trying to win so we could keep the court and stay on. And we just, you've been on a team, right? Somebody gets a rebound, somebody passes out, that kind of thing. Somebody guards their best player. Somebody like me just shoots threes all day. I just lie. But it was ironic because I'd be in these faculty meetings with all these people from Harvard and Yale talking, theory and critical race theory and all this kind of stuff. And it was like lived on that basketball court 3 or 4 times a week, just a bunch of old men. who could barely run, but reliving their youth. But we all get along in that space.
I don't know how you guys feel about athletics. I recently had a friend over. We played music for years. He was the drummer in my last band, and we had went on this tour of North America, US and Canada, that was financially disastrous, but it was the most fun I'd ever had with 3 other human beings. And it was the closest I'd ever gotten to 3 other human beings outside of my own children. And that's an amazing bond that you can have. And I feel like athletics is another one of those times where you have those bonds, like you're saying, just working with someone that you don't know that well and be like, okay, Bob, you're killing it from behind the arc. So we're going to set up a screen for you to, when you're able to accomplish just making a shot and you did it together, then you get it, then you understand. And that's a feeling that I'm addicted to. I hate the isolation sometimes of working so much alone, even through these like Zoom-like calls, working with the other people on my show. I love when we get to do live stuff. Scott was at something live where me and Ben and a bunch of other friends were at. I love that kind of stuff. Because I'm working with people to make something happen, and then we're experiencing the thing together. And that's what wrestling is for a lot of people. And for a lot of people, circling back to Hogan, that's what Hulkamania was for you. You were a kid screaming in your room when he put his hand to his ear. And then when he does it, you're like, I was a part of that.
Yeah, exactly. I grew up in Dallas, Texas in the 80s. And so there, it's like the Von Erichs.
The Von Erichs.
And you would, especially at Thanksgiving, where you're always able to talk my dad into taking us to Reunion Arena, which is like a pretty big venue, to watch like the extravaganza. Always the last matches were the big matches between the Von Erichs and the Freebirds, or the Von Erichs and Ric Flair.
Did you watch the Four Horsemen growing up too?
That was more when I was in college. And so I watched that a little, kind of started to fade on wrestling like through college. But I watched it a little bit. I'm probably a little older than you think I am too. But I go with my cousins, going with my brother and my dad. There's just some very fond memories. And that was some good bond, like even bonding with that family too, who I still have a lot in common with my dad and my brother, but like with my cousins, it's definitely like drifted away. But those are like very fond memories. And that was like some bonding that like never, kind of like what you're talking about, is like things that I'll always like cherish and have that with.
That's important. Another person that passed away was Ozzy Osbourne. Like 3 people passed away. This to me was like Kayfabe personified. 3 people passed away. Malcolm Jamal Warner, Ozzy Osbourne, and Robert Osborne, and Terry Bollea all passed away. But for most people, it was Theo, Ozzy, and Hulk.
Yeah.
Everyone was Theo, Ozzy, Hulk. And I found that interesting that we mourned the characters, because that's also how we grew up. A generation growing up, they babysat by television. And these iconic images of my past, Ozzy Osbourne being this bigger than life musical figure that was supposed to be evil, but his music just sounds like just the Beatles on 11. Those songs aren't really very evil. They don't match the look or the marketing of the man. And I saw some people, Ozzy is Zionist. It's like, I don't think that man thought too much about the Middle East. I know there was a letter he quote unquote signed on to, but I saw the actual audio. I don't know if you heard the actual audio from that last performance. It did not. Whatever you saw on the stream was not what people in the arena heard, as his voice could barely do it. I don't know how coherent he was. I know his wife she seems like an actual Zionist, but as far as Ozzy Osbourne, I can't remember him saying anything about Israel. I think he's played there. A lot of people have played there because they pay you more money.
Because we're getting close to the end here. And this is a question based on my personal ignorance of all this, right? I know a little bit about wrestling, but then you have this shift to like MMA and the stuff they're doing now, which is seems to be part of kind of Trump world, right? And we're hearing now about the bros and Joe Rogan and wrestling and how this is part of this kind of cultural development that like the Democratic Party has no clue about. How did that, is there actually even like wrestling per se anymore? Or is it just all this like
No, it still
MMA
exists.
stuff? Or
No, wrestling still exists.
it does.
WWE took over WCW, and they took over another smaller league that was doing way more aggressive wrestling.
But the MMA stuff is a lot bigger, right?
No,
Oh, it's not? Okay.
wrestling is still the big ticket.
Oh, okay.
They're still doing arenas. MMA is pretty large, but there's a huge difference between actually getting beat in the face for $1,000 in an MMA fight and have some guy pulling some hits and accidentally hitting you a couple times for way more money in WWE. There's a better pipeline to like movies and television or streaming television, whatever that's called now, through WWE than there is for MMA, where wins and losses are important. We have to keep in mind that MMA is a real sport where wins and losses aren't necessarily predetermined.
Yeah.
Even though we talk about the wrestling being fake, what's fake is who's going to win the match. But some of those hits are very real.
Yeah.
I do agree with you that MMA is a bit of an outgrowth of pro wrestling. But when pro wrestlers did come into that world, they definitely didn't like them, and they tried to get rid of them.
But
Go ahead.
no, you say I am a boxing fan. Now I do blame wrestling for that, the demise of boxing, because I grew up. Anybody my age, I'm sure you're sick of hearing it. The golden age. On Saturday afternoons on free TV, we saw Ali, Frazier, Kenny Norton, Jimmy Young, George Foreman, my favorite, Ernie Shavers, and that kind of went away. It seems to me like I couldn't tell you who the heavyweight champions now. I don't know any of these guys anymore.
Who's the heavyweight champ? Is it Tyson Fury?
Is it the Russian or
is it a Russian?
That's there was that big Klitschko or whatever. Or?
If we want to have a real class conversation, we can ask the question: whatever happened to all the people that you're talking about? What happened to 6'5", 220-pound black guys? The gyms are gone. Number one, basketball pays more, football pays more. If you want to know the truth, people that get into MMA, they just want to get hit in the face. You're not really getting quote unquote the best athletes.
Boxing was always the working class. It was the Italian kids, right? I grew up with Italian boxers. I knew all of them. Irish boxers, Mexican boxers, Puerto Rican boxers, Cubans, best in the world, right? Like I don't know anything about it. I know they still box, but I don't.
There's more Eastern Europeans. Look, I live in Mexico. There's still a huge boxing scene here because sport you can participate in and be 5'3" and be a world champion.
Well, the fights I see on HBO are usually Latin American fighters.
It's still right. Floyd Mayweather still can draw people. He's really good. There's some Terrence Crawford. There's some good fighters that aren't Jake Paul. He's making a mockery of the sport, in my opinion, in trying to quote unquote resurrect it. But that working class element that you're speaking of that was a part of boxing for so long, it's in Eastern Europe and it's in Latin America, because that's really where you said certain parts of Southeast Asia. That's really where you're going to see it. If you like boxing, there's definitely great boxing still happening. Fighting styles have changed a little bit, right? Guys don't fight in the clinch anymore like they used to. That's why guys like Floyd Mayweather dominate, because who can stand in the clinch with someone and take those shots? And that's how you're gonna have a chance to beat someone like Floyd or Canelo Alvarez. That's a whole different show about fighting, but it's still there. And MMA is its own thing too. But I think bigger than MMA and what you're getting from even the derivative of that is something like power slap, which there is no skill in whatsoever. It's just two grown adults slapping the bejesus out of themselves until one of them falls. And that is the dumbing down to me of society, because sport was something that for a long time was aristocratic, right? Only rich people could participate in a lot of these things. Only rich people could have guns and know how to fight. And so we called boxing the sweet science. There definitely is a lot of strategy in MMA. But if all you want is the knockout, I'll just give you the knockout with slap fight. And then we're going to market it as this is where real tough people are because they're so tough. It's like, that's not tough because you can't train for that. I can't just punch you in the head, Bob, for 8 hours a day and say, all right, you ready to get punched in the face again?
And my ex-wife did that to me already.
Punch in the face and the pocket. Because much like with boxing, you can't go hard when you're training because you already have a short shelf life. And even people that had the strongest chins, those checks will always come due. You will pay eventually. No one's chin is magic. You can't keep getting punched in the face and expect to not get knocked out. But I do agree with you that wrestling is a part of that because wrestling always just showed us the fun part. What I will say in a mild defense of wrestling is the match has always played second fiddle to the storyline. It's never been about the match. Who gives a shit who can do a backflip off the top rope? It's the storyline.
It was the heat, right?
Heat. It was the
Yeah,
heat.
it was the heat. That what always what brings me to movies and television, novels is the storyline. It's probably what drew me into wrestling when I was a kid. I have one last question.
Gotta be brief.
Yeah, it's going to be brief. Maybe it's not going to be brief. There's a cultural impact of all of these folks who grew up watching wrestling in the 80s and 90s, and Hulk Hogan is at the center of that. Maybe this will be a longer question, longer answer. What would you say is some of the cultural impact of that today, politically? So
Reinforcing neoliberal values. Reinforcing neoliberal values that the world revolves around them, and there's simply winners and losers. That is what I would take away from the Attitude Era, which is where we still are today. It's how the world's divided into, and that's really what wrestling became when that pivot is made.
And you would say that's what's propelled Trump to 2 terms in office?
My God, that and a Democratic Party that said the solution to 400 years of racism is entrepreneurial uplift through foundation money. And here's a DEI candidate for VP. Remember Joe Biden said, I'm going to run for vice president. It's going to be a colored gal.
And they preyed upon that.
Yeah.
Bob, do you have any other questions?
No, thanks. I just enjoyed talking to you. We can talk. I can say things to you that I can't talk about with anybody else on air.
Yeah.
We'll bring you on to one of the sports nights because we do a sports show every week on TIR. My co-host actually has some professional fights under his belt. So if you want to come on boxing and fights and you have a ball, we talk football, you'll love it.
Folks, we've been talking with Jason Myles, writer, musician, and co-host of This Is Revolution podcast. And we've been talking about the late Terry Bollea, also known as Hulk Hogan, and the cultural impact of Hulk Hogan and wrestling and boxing and lots of other things. If you like what you're hearing, please check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening to this on the audio platform, give us a rate and review. And then if you really like us, go to greenredpodcast.org, hit that support button, or become a patron, patreon.com/greenredpodcast. And Jason, it's always fun to talk with you. always glad to see you and hang out with you. Everyone else out there in the world, make trouble and misbehave, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, brothers.